The chamber throbbed with a soft ultraviolet glow, its source unseen, casting shifting shadows along the smooth, curved walls of alloyed metal. Rows of cadets stood in perfect silence, spaced with precise symmetry, each species equidistant, each face touched by the faint shimmer of the simulation's outer matrix. The air was thick with the sterile tang of ozone and ionized gel, the unmistakable scent of artificially rendered environments. The temperature was calibrated for every known biology. Yet somehow, everyone felt cold. It wasn't the kind of cold that touched skin. It was the chill of anticipation, the deep, creeping tension that came not from climate, but from uncertainty. Near the back of the formation stood Cadet Oscar Hale, the only human in the room, flanked on either side by larger, more imposing figures, one with stone-grey skin like weathered granite, the other cloaked in a forest of fine, twitching hairs. Oscar stood at ease, arms behind his back, posture neutral, but his eyes were alive, scanning, measuring. He wasn't afraid. He was preparing. This wasn't a training drill. This was the Galactic Joint Simulation Trials, the GJST, the pinnacle of interspecies combat evaluation, sanctioned only under the highest tier protocols. At the head of the chamber, on a raised crystalline platform that seemed to float without propulsion, hovered Commander Vell. A Reline, elegant, alien, and laced with faintly glowing spinal extensions that curled like living filaments. His voice didn't echo. It bypassed sound entirely, entering the cadets' minds as pure meaning, translated in real time by the neural receptors implanted deep within their cortices. "Final directive," Commander Vell announced. "No weapons of any kind will be permitted within the simulation chamber. No blades, no firearms, no explosives, no projectiles, no tools with designed hostile function. This includes nanoweaponry, psychoactive pheromones, ultrasonic disruptors, gravity modifiers, and venom-delivering exoskeletal protrusions." There was a slight murmur of dissent, not vocal but biological. The insectoid to Oscar's left gave off a low-frequency vibration. The obsidian-skinned reptile beside the insectoid flexed his talons with a subtle pop. A glimmer of nervous energy moved through the formation like an electric shiver. Even the more stoic cadets, those with no eyes, those that hovered instead of walked, shifted slightly. Oscar blinked, then lowered his gaze toward the item tucked snugly in the inner pocket of his regulation trousers, a spoon. It was standard issue, polished steel, curved neatly at the edge, slightly dented from years of automated washing cycles in the academy mess hall. It had been with him longer than his field boots. Earlier that morning, just before boarding the shuttle to the trials platform, Oscar had paused at the mess. He didn't eat. He just grabbed the spoon. No one noticed. No one cared. Commander Vell's thoughts pressed again into the center of every mind. You are expected to demonstrate intelligence, restraint, improvisation, and survival competence. The simulation chamber will be hostile but survivable. No resources will be supplied. Extraction is conditional on performance metrics. You are authorized to work in tandem or opposition. Alliance is permissible. Betrayal is expected. Oscar tilted his head slightly. That was the part that intrigued him. The way Vell emphasized betrayal. It wasn't a warning. It was an encouragement. The floating crystal shrank, compacting into a translucent disc the size of a palm before disappearing into the floor. From above, panels opened in the ceiling, and magnetic pulses pulled the cadets upward into dispersal tubes, thin beams of white light that swallowed them in small groups. Oscar felt his body rise. He didn't resist. The sensation was smooth, frictionless, like drifting up a column of air. He passed through a dozen blinking rings, his limbs held in stasis, his consciousness suspended just above his instincts. Then the light dropped him. He landed on his feet in complete silence. Around him was terrain that resembled a dense jungle, but without trees. The plants resembled coral more than flora, bulging stalks, open vents, glittering filaments reaching into the air. The ground beneath him was soft but firm, like volcanic foam. There were shadows overhead, suggesting movement or an artificial sky, but nothing could be confirmed visually. The environment was alien in every sense, unfamiliar yet functional. He knew this wasn't a simulation in the traditional sense. It wasn't illusion. It was real. Grown in a biocated chamber aboard a satellite habitat the size of a small moon. Oscar crouched and took in his surroundings. He could hear movement in the distance, branches brushing against something, a soft hiss, a hum. Others were being dropped in. He did not know where. He did not care. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the spoon, and turned it over in his hand. It was an absurd thing to carry into a simulation designed for survival. No sharpened edge, no grip, no adaptable use by conventional standards. It wasn't long enough to be a club. It wasn't rigid enough to be a blade. It couldn't conduct electricity, inject venom, or deflect plasma. It was a spoon. It stirred things. It served food. It was, by every rule laid down by the Rolkan, not a weapon. And that was exactly why he brought it. He crouched beside a nearby coral vent and scraped a small section of its crust with the spoon's edge. The resistance was minimal, softer than expected. The curved head slipped between two soft fibers and came back coated with orange residue. He sniffed it. Acrid, sour, biological, possibly corrosive. He made a note. From deeper within the terrain, a shriek echoed, long, high-pitched, cut short, mid-sound. The simulation had started. Oscar rose, held the spoon like a pen between his fingers, and walked silently in the direction of the noise. Oscar stepped lightly between two pale, rubbery stalks that exhaled faint clouds of bioluminescent mist. The air around him tasted faintly metallic, like a storm approaching through wires. Underfoot, the terrain shifted with every step, springy in some places, gritty in others. He moved carefully, alert to the faint clicks, rustles, and shifting vibrations that traveled through the alien environment like the murmurs of a restless machine. Up ahead, the terrain opened into a clearing ringed by tall, inward-leaning structures resembling crystalline ribs. In the center lay a husk, scorched, fractured, and steaming faintly. The shape was vaguely humanoid, but twisted, elongated. A former cadet, though Oscar couldn't tell which species. The body had not been torn or ripped, but imploded, as if compressed violently from the inside out. There were no signs of weapon discharge, no claw marks, no acidic residue. Whatever caused it, it was environmental. Or worse, adapted. Oscar didn't linger. He crouched near the edge of the clearing, dragging the spoon gently through the soil. Beneath the soft surface, he uncovered a network of fibrous threads, pulsing slowly, alive and responsive. He leaned in and pressed the back of his hand against the soil. The temperature spiked slightly with his touch, as if the ground had recognized him. The simulation wasn't passive. It wasn't just terrain, it was a participant. He stood again, spoon still in hand. It wasn't just a spoon anymore, not to him. He had already sharpened the edge slightly against the coral's rough skin. The rounded surface could reflect light. The concave side could gather liquid. It wasn't much, but it was his. Others would look for weapons. He would look for function. A sound behind him made him freeze. It was soft at first, a wet scraping, like something dragging a heavy chain across a sponge. He turned slowly, careful not to shift the loose particles beneath his feet. In the shadows beyond the rib pillars, something moved. A figure stepped into view, a tall quadrupedal form, lean and smooth. Its elongated skull reflected ambient light in fractured prisms, its 4 limbs flexed inward like sickles preparing to close. It stood still for a moment, head tilted, watching him. Oscar didn't move. The creature had no eyes, but its jaw flexed rhythmically as it inhaled the air. It was testing scent. Its neck jerked slightly with every twitch of its nostrils. Its limbs coiled tighter. It charged. Oscar didn't run. He didn't crouch. He turned sideways, letting the first swipe miss him by centimeters. The creature's momentum carried it too far. He pivoted behind it, jabbing the spoon into the softer tissue behind its front joint. The edge didn't pierce far, but it struck the node he'd guessed was there, a soft bundle of reactive nerves exposed under translucent skin. The creature shrieked, not from pain, but from surprise. It twisted, flailing, tail thrashing through one of the rib structures and sending shards scattering into the clearing. Oscar didn't go for a second strike. He didn't need to win. He needed to disappear. As the creature reared up, he hurled a handful of the bioluminescent mist he'd gathered from a nearby stalk. The cloud hit the creature's face and clung to it, glowing furiously. He turned and sprinted into the denser part of the jungle. He ran until the shriek faded behind him, and then farther still. He didn't stop until his lungs burned and the ground beneath his feet shifted from sponge to something firmer, smooth, cracked and humming. He looked down and realized he was standing on a structure, not ground, but roof. Artificial. The simulation was layered. He crouched and began feeling along the surface with his free hand. The spoon tapped along the edge of what appeared to be a ventilation grate. He tested it. Loose.
With enough leverage, he could lift it. He jammed the spoon into the seam and twisted slowly. The spoon bent, groaned softly, but held. The grate popped free. Oscar slid into darkness. Inside, the air was dry, stale, and sharp with the scent of ancient coolant. Pipes lined the walls in diagonal patterns, and the floor was a mesh of woven composite. Somewhere deeper within, machinery clicked. The space was narrow, and Oscar moved in a low crawl, spoon now held between his teeth. After several minutes of crawling, he reached an intersection where the duct widened into a viewing vent. He peered down into a vast chamber lit by hexagonal lanterns along the walls. 3 other cadets were inside, 2 from species he didn't recognize, and 1 he did. A tall creature with pale green skin and multi-jointed arms. She was a member of the Visari, a highly intelligent race known for their photographic memory and biosynthetic neural accelerators. She was speaking. "Simulation's parameters change every 6 minutes," she said. "The creature patterns rotate in modular bursts. If we stay stationary, the map adapts to neutralize our presence. We have to remain in motion." The others didn't argue. 1 held a jagged shard of something that resembled stone, clearly scavenged as a makeshift blade. The 3rd had a bundle of synthetic vines coiled like a whip. Weapons, technically improvised, but still weapons. Oscar pressed his mouth close to the grate and whispered, "Idiots." He watched them move through a door on the far side of the room. As soon as the last one crossed the threshold, the lights flickered and a loud hiss echoed through the space. A toxic fog poured from the upper vents. The entire chamber had been a trap. 1 step into it had triggered the seal. He leaned back from the grate and shook his head. The simulation didn't punish aggression, it punished predictability. Oscar realized that the more an action looked like survival instinct, the more the system punished it. Reflex was dangerous. Overreaction, suicidal. His heart beat faster, not from fear, but from clarity. He now understood what the simulation was really testing: Not violence, not strength, pattern disruption. And the spoon, harmless, ignored, was a perfect pattern breaker. No one expected it, not even the environment. He moved again, deeper into the ducts. Along the way, he used the back of the spoon to carve a directional code into the metal, simple arrows, just in case he needed to backtrack. The handle had already begun to curve, unnaturally bent from lifting the grate earlier. He pressed it gently against the heated surface of a pipe, using the warmth to mold it back into a gentle curve. It wasn't a weapon, but it was evolving, and so was he. Oscar dropped quietly from the ventilation shaft and landed in a narrow trench flanked by curved metallic roots, pulsing with slow electric light. The air had warmed as he descended, thickened with trace gases that clung to the tongue like static. Beneath his boots, the floor was composed of interlocking scales, each one twitching faintly, like the skin of some massive, sleeping organism. He stepped carefully, spoon gripped loosely in his right hand. The simulation's architecture had shifted again. Now he moved through what resembled a biomechanical maze, half machinery, half muscle. The walls pulsed in slow rhythms. Breathing or thinking, he wasn't sure. This lower layer was far from the vine-wrapped surface jungle. Here, everything was smooth, gleaming, and humming with a low, almost sub-audible tone that vibrated through his bones. He knew this zone had not been accessed by many. Most cadets wouldn't think to go downward. Instinct told him to hunt outward, not inward. A glint flashed ahead. He crouched, narrowing his gaze. A figure moved across a wide chamber bathed in orange light. The being was tall, nearly 2.5 meters, built like an obsidian statue, with deep blue plating across his arms and a jaw that protruded like a natural shield. Oscar recognized the species immediately, a Shrock enforcer, not one of the intellectual types. This one was bred for melee, reflexive aggression encoded into every movement. Shrock were known for their internal carbon-forging glands. Under pressure, they could shape body heat into hardened exo-knives that extended from the forearms. Not technically a weapon, since it was a biological function, but functionally lethal. The Shrock was alone, prowling. Oscar stayed in cover. His fingers traced the length of the spoon, now slightly dulled and scuffed at the curve. It had lost some of its polish, but not its utility. It was no match for carbon-forged blades, not in combat, not directly, so he wouldn't use it that way. He watched the Shrock study the floor following a scent trail. Someone else had passed through recently, possibly a fleeing cadet. The Shrock's massive head swiveled, sniffing. He grunted, a sharp, throat-heavy sound, and moved toward an adjoining corridor. Oscar moved too, keeping low, silent. He tracked the Shrock without closing the distance, studying the rhythm of his steps, the stiffness of his right knee, the subtle delay in his left turn. The creature had been injured, not deeply, but enough to limit his agility. When the Shrock entered a dome-shaped chamber lined with organoglass, Oscar followed. The space was silent. The Shrock reached the center and crouched, tapping one claw into a small indentation on the floor. The tiles lit up beneath him, responding to his biosignature. The simulation was rewarding him. Some hidden function had been triggered. Oscar did not hesitate. He stepped out from behind the curved pillar and approached with deliberate slowness. The Shrock rose at once, spinning, blades partially extended from his forearms, gleaming with high carbon density. His upper lip curled in a sneer. "Human," he growled, his voice thick and coarse. "I should have known." Oscar didn't flinch. He stopped 5 paces away and tilted his head slightly. "You triggered something on the floor." The Shrock flexed his arms. "I earned it." Oscar nodded once. "Good, then this will be interesting." He tossed the spoon lightly in his hand, letting it spin once in the air before catching it by the neck. The Shrock's expression twisted into disbelief, then mockery. You challenge me with a feeding tool? Oscar offered no reply. He stepped sideways, eyes fixed on the Shrok's dominant side. The Shrok charged, fast. Oscar pivoted, planting his back foot and using the spoon's rounded edge to hook under a thin lip of metal on the floor tile. He popped it upward just as the Shrok's foot slammed forward. The tile flipped slightly. It was a minor disturbance, but at full momentum a minor disturbance was enough. The Shrok's weight shifted unexpectedly. His ankle twisted, not enough to break, but enough to ruin precision. His swing went wide. Oscar ducked under it and drove the spoon's blunt edge into the sensitive joint behind the plated knee. The reaction was immediate. The Shrok buckled, snarling, swinging wildly with his opposite arm. A blade nicked Oscar's shoulder, drawing a shallow line of blood. Oscar staggered back, breathing through his teeth. The Shrok advanced again, slower now, more cautious. But Oscar wasn't aiming for another strike. He stepped beside a wall panel covered in what appeared to be thin metallic webbing, resonant mesh. He tapped it twice with the spoon. A low chime echoed. He remembered something from earlier training. Resonant mesh amplified pressure. Too much and it would overload. The Shrok lunged again, both blades raised. Oscar stepped aside at the last second and swung the spoon flat across the mesh. The sound was sharp, piercing. The wall pulsed violently, then surged. The wave of kinetic energy slammed into the Shrok's chest, launching him backward into the center of the chamber. His body flipped twice before crashing into the dome's far wall with a sickening crunch. He slid to the ground, groaning, blades retracting instinctively. Oscar approached slowly, his shoulder burning from the cut. He stood over the Shrok, breathing steadily. The larger being tried to rise, but his left leg gave out. He fell again, growling, defeated. The spoon hung at Oscar's side, slightly warped from the energy feedback, but intact. "You used a wall," the Shrok muttered, coughing. "I used what wasn't forbidden," Oscar replied. The Shrok looked at him, hatred dulling into something else, confusion, maybe even recognition. A red glow illuminated the floor. Above them, a single drone descended, cylindrical, silent, with 3 rings of flashing indicators. It projected a symbol into the air, a glyph of confirmation. The first official elimination. 1 cadet removed by another. The simulation acknowledged it without commentary. No points, no praise, just continuation. The drone hovered beside Oscar for several seconds, then darted away. He watched it vanish into the ducts above, then turned back toward the exit. The Shrok remained where he lay, groaning. Oscar didn't deliver a final blow. That wasn't the purpose. Elimination was declared, and the system would remove him. Oscar left the dome, spoon in hand. He didn't smile. He didn't breathe easier. He simply moved on. The simulation had seen what it needed to see, and now others would be watching. Far above the simulation zone, within the orbital chamber designated Observation Module 17C, the tribunal sat in intense silence. The room was designed for impartiality. Curved glass walls surrounded the circular dais, displaying dozens of real-time feeds from deep within the environment below. Each screen pulsed softly with biometric readouts, positional tracking, emotional resonance spikes, and environmental reactions. The data flickered across all surfaces like moving tattoos on the skin of the room. None of it was filtered.
Seated at the uppermost tier, Commander Vell kept his fingers steepled beneath his chin. His translucent spinal extensions pulsed in slow rhythm behind his head, faintly luminescent in the dim control light. He had not spoken since the elimination glyph was displayed. The Shrok had been removed from the simulation, not by brute force, not by environmental failure, but by strategy, and more strangely, by a spoon. "Humans," murmured Chief Evaluator Suril, a stooped, multi-eyed veteran from the Planetary Academy on Velkos. His voice held no judgment, only a fatigued disbelief. He brought a utensil. Dr. Maria Parr, the lead cognition analyst and specialist in adaptive threat behavior, tapped one long fingernail against her datapad. She was composed, elegant, and notoriously difficult to impress. Her gaze didn't leave the screen showing Oscar's vitals. He modified the utensil. He used it to mislead the environment, disarm the predator, and redirect kinetic output through a resonant mesh panel. That is no longer a utensil. That is adaptation. From the corner of the chamber, Director Rix folded his arms. He was not part of the Academy. He represented the Combat Protocol Council, an oversight body known for its rigid interpretation of the rules. His skin was a smooth gradient of silver and green, and his elongated skull bore ceremonial markings denoting rank. He narrowed his black eyes. It was not a registered object. It was not scanned upon entry. Dr. Parr replied calmly, because the scanner identified it as non-harmful. It had no edge, no emission field, no active tech. It passed every restriction. It has now been used in direct combat. That alters its classification. Commander Vell stirred slightly. His voice emerged with smooth precision, tone unchanging. He has not broken any rule, only the assumption behind them. Silence returned, this time heavier. On one screen, Oscar moved through a deep cavern of obsidian-coloured roots. The spoon hung loosely from his belt, now tethered by a strand of fibre. His shoulder bore the mark of a cut, healed slightly from the auto-sterile field triggered by simulation protocol after non-lethal wounds. Surel adjusted his ocular implant. You realize what this means. Others will start to emulate him. If not this round, then next. Resource manipulation, repurposing objects, turning passivity into utility. The psychological implications are why he's still inside, Commander Var interrupted gently. Dr. Parr's lips curved into the smallest of smiles. He represents asymmetry. All these species train in symmetrical logic, cause, effect, strength, counter-strength. He treats every input as a question instead of an instruction. Director Rix stepped closer to the primary panel and enlarged the section of footage showing the elimination sequence. Oscar's movement, the redirection of the Shrock, the energy pulse. It played in silent repetition. He used the environment against another cadet. He weaponized terrain. Is that not outside the spirit of the trial? Brawl turned his head slowly toward Rix. The spirit of the trial is to observe problem-solving under constraint. We restricted weapons, not thought. If we intended to test physical superiority, we would have thrown them into a pit with blades and let the strongest emerge. We did not. Rix frowned. The Shrock may file a protest. He will claim ambush. Dr. Parr's eyes gleamed. Let him. The logs show Oscar never attacked. He defended. He redirected. He survived. Surel shifted his attention toward the lower screens. Several other cadets are beginning to mimic his patterns. One Visari has started scavenging utility objects. Another, from the Karthak species, has tied rope from discarded vent tissue and reinforced it with tree resin. Indirect mimicry already in play. Val exhaled slowly. Contagious, yes. That's what makes it significant, Dr. Parr said. Not just what he did, but what it made possible. From the far side of the chamber, an assistant entered, young, nervous, with a clipboard shaking faintly in his hands. He bowed low and spoke in a whisper. We've received a request from Archive Command to transmit the footage. Rix turned sharply. To whom? To the Council? R nodded once. Approved. The assistant vanished as silently as he came. Dr. Parr straightened in her seat. They want to know if we're dealing with an anomaly or the beginning of a pattern. Sorel rubbed the ridge of his temple. It would be easier if he failed. Then we could dismiss it. Foal stood at last, his long silhouette casting a double shadow across the curved floor. That is precisely why it matters. Because he did not. On the screen, Oscar crouched at the edge of a cliff, overlooking a shifting field of tessellated light. Below him, an unknown structure moved slowly, like a breathing engine made of hexagonal glass. He didn't speak. He didn't run. He just waited. R stepped forward, and his voice echoed across the tribunal. This simulation was never about winning. It was about understanding who rewrites the rules without breaking them. And now the rules themselves are watching. The simulation ended without a sound. One moment, Oscar stood atop the cliff overlooking the tessellated plain. The next, the world folded around him like a collapsing projection. The light drained from the environment, dissolving the jungle, the roots, the heat, and the wind. His footing vanished in silence, and gravity no longer applied. His vision blurred with silver, then stillness. When his eyes adjusted, he stood inside a chamber composed of nothing but angled reflections. Mirror-like surfaces reflected his form endlessly in every direction, each one slightly delayed as if time had fractured inside the glass. In his right hand, the spoon still hung loosely from his fingers, bent at the handle, burnished at the edge, stained faintly with the metallic blue eye of something not quite organic. The silence lasted long enough for his thoughts to settle. A figure emerged from behind one of the mirrored walls. Commander Var's form stepped through the surface as though passing through water. His posture was relaxed, but there was an unmistakable intensity in his translucent gaze. His spinal extensions hovered still. "Simulation complete," Val said. Oscar nodded once. "I assumed as much." Val circled slowly, not threatening, but examining. "You were the last candidate. 14 eliminations, 3 environment-induced withdrawals, and you." Oscar looked at the mirrored wall beside him. There were better fighters. "More reactive, more aggressive," V corrected, "but none with your result." Oscar remained silent. He understood there was more to come. Val stopped a few paces away. "Explain." Oscar turned the spoon in his hand before answering. "You said no weapons." "We did. So I brought something no one would fear," Oscar said. "Something invisible to the simulation's threat matrix. Something everyone else dismissed, even when it was in my hand." V raised an eyebrow. "You manipulated the simulation itself." "I adapted to it," Oscar said, "and I let it adapt to me." Foal tilted his head slightly. "Others tried to overpower it. You let it shape you instead." Oscar shook his head. "Not shape in form. I never fought the environment. I learned from it. The moment I saw that terrain could betray, I realized it could also assist. Everything there was reactive, alive in some way. So I didn't impose force. I offered function." Brawl gestured to the spoon. "That object should not have made it past screening. It's a spoon." "It is now a symbol," Brawl said quietly. "It made the council nervous." "I didn't intend that." "Yet you achieved it," Brawl said. "And that raises the question, was your strategy about victory or about exposure?" Oscar considered that. "Neither. It was about efficiency. I didn't waste motion. I didn't engage unless I had to. I knew every action would ripple." The simulation rewarded disruption, not domination. Var watched him. "You could have brought nothing at all." Oscar smiled faintly. "I thought about that. But the spoon gave me one more thing." "What?" "Attention." Brawl blinked once. Explain. Oscar held up the spoon. Every cadet who saw this laughed, dismissed me, ignored me. That gave me the space to act without resistance. And when it finally mattered, it wasn't just a spoon anymore. It was a question no one else had asked. For a moment, all was quiet. Then he turned away and walked toward the far wall, which shimmered and dissolved into a new scene. A massive amphitheatre filled with tiered seats, observers from dozens of species, silent, watching, evaluating. In the centre of the space was a single podium beneath a neutral white light. "You're expected," Val said without looking back. Oscar stepped forward. As he moved into the open, the silence within the amphitheatre broke into whispers, not vocalized, but resonating through layered frequencies. Some were biological pulses, others mental broadcasts. Every observer present was tuned in. He climbed the steps to the podium and stopped beneath the light. A voice, not from a person, but from the system itself, resonated through the air. "Explain your intent." Oscar looked across the countless faces, some visible, some concealed, some alien beyond description. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't adjust his posture. He spoke plainly. "I didn't come to prove humans are stronger. We're not always. I didn't come to prove we're smarter. Many of you are smarter than I am. I came to see how long it would take for someone to notice that I wasn't playing your game." The light above him pulsed. "I didn't bring a weapon," he continued, "because I didn't need one. The simulation punished predictability. I knew any reaction would be punished, so I didn't react. I observed, I listened, and I brought the only tool I could think of, something so harmless it would never register as a threat. Until it did." He lifted the spoon. "This didn't win the battle. I did. Because I saw the test beneath the test. You weren't measuring victory. You were measuring disruption. And the most disruptive act was to refuse the fight entirely." Silence hung heavy in the amphitheatre. Then a low harmonic resonance filled the chamber. Approval. Brawl stepped up beside him on the platform. "Cadet Oscar Hale," his voice booming across the arena, "you are hereby certified as a strategic irregular, exempt from standard combat deployment, granted provisional advisory rank within the Intercouncil Behavioral Division." Oscar didn't flinch. "And the others?" "Some will return, others won't," Brawl said. "But none of them shifted the Council's view on the rules. You did." He extended his hand. Oscar clasped it immediately, then turned to leave, spoon still in hand. He had never intended to found a doctrine, but now he knew he had. And the doctrine was clear. In a world of weapons, the sharpest tool is the one no one ever expects.